We are now a nation of haters.
Fending off threats of violence.
Hate calls, even death threats.
Targeted with death threats.
I get death threats not every day, but close to every day. Some of them are very specific.
Did ugly personal attacks.
What got to me was the vitriol and the vulgarity that was just unleashed at me in ways that I couldn't even understand where that was coming from.
It has all gone too far.
I don't think there's anything more important for us to address. To go from being a nation of haters.
Do you have some thoughts on those chants, which also, included vote him out?
Yeah, I think the chants were appalling, but certainly to be expected when you're in the heart of the swamp.
To a nation that has the presumption of grace. The presumption of grace means you don't assume that the person who you're in combat with on social media or cable TV is a bad person. We need to find a way to go from being a society that has a presumption of hatred to a presumption of grace. The right thing to do is to try to show everyone, except in the most extreme circumstances, the presumption of grace. But the most important thing is to find a way to give the incentive to do not what is strong and wrong, but strong and right. And strong and right begins, and I think ends to some extent, with the presumption of grace.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Mark Halperin.
When I was 11 years old, there was a bike I really wanted. And so every night I prayed for the bike. And then after a while, I realized that's not how God works. So I stole the bike and I prayed for forgiveness. That's a joke I got off the internet today because I was looking to say something funny to start about the concept of the presumption of grace and all the things that relate to it. And forgiveness is a big part of that. Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining this town hall. Our focus for the start is going to be on the presumption of grace, something that I've been thinking about and talking about, writing about, and asking about now for a while. I want to know, for each of you, answer two questions. One is, can you afford James Comey, the presumption of grace? Could you, after what he did in 2016, when his decisions effectively cost Hillary Clinton the election and made Donald Trump president? Can you afford James Comey, the same man, the presumption of grace, after he effectively spied on Donald Trump and his campaign and then moved the country down the path towards impeachment? James Comey is a complicated man. He has been a hero to some and a villain to others, and he has been afforded the presumption of grace at times, and at other times, the presumption of hate by people in both parties. The pivot point really was May of 2017 when Donald Trump fired Comey as head of the FBI. And the whole confusion that caused, I think, can be seen in this clip from the day Comey was fired by Trump with Stephen Colbert.
Huge story that broke just minutes ago, like less than 10 minutes ago. FBI Director James Comey has just been fired by Donald Trump. Wow. Huge Donald Trump fans here tonight.
So whether you think Comey today is someone deserving of the presumption of hate or the presumption of grace is maybe different than what you thought before, but I would argue no matter what you think of what he's done over the last 5 years, he is still worthy very much of the presumption of grace, as everyone is. So tonight I'm going to talk about four things. First is what's happened since I last convened everybody in a town hall and we talked about this topic, some of the feedback I've gotten, some of the reactions, some of the questions that have been raised. Then I want to lay out my theory of what I call the four-headed monster, an area that I think is one of the great locations of a presumption of hatred, and where I think our joint efforts could be an early sign of the prospect of success in changing our culture from one of hate to one of grace. And then I want to recruit you in that effort and explain how we're going to proceed. And then again, get some of your ideas on the presumption of grace, some of your questions about it. So first, what the reaction's been like. It's been extraordinarily lovely. Most of the people who've reached out to me have encouraged me, have suggested they recognize that in some ways this is a challenge, but it's a necessary challenge because the nature of our political discourse, our social discourse, in many cases, our family discourse needs to shift from hate to grace. And I've heard people with ideas. I've heard people who have asked me probing questions about how this will work, and some of that we'll talk about tonight. But in general, I've been very encouraged. Now, there have been some moments that have been a little bit less encouraging. Probably the biggest category is a lot of people say, I'm all for this, but I need a pass. I need a pass for my uncle who's a bigot, or I need a pass for someone who's in elective office. They want to know, alternatively, if they don't get a pass, how can they show grace to someone? How can they show grace, for instance, to someone who voted for the presidential candidate they did not vote for? And there's no doubt that, at least right now in the aftermath of the election, that is, for many people I hear from, the toughest case. One of my readers sent me an email and said this: I can't look at people that support Trump with a presumption of grace. It has been a 4-year assault on decency, honesty, empathy, and the shared values that we have always struggled to live up to in our country. And so I know for many people, the president is someone they don't feel they can give a presumption of grace to. My main reaction to emails like that, besides compassion for understanding how they feel about it, is to say, I don't think this is going to work if people want to pass on 75 or 80 million people. That's too big a group to say, well, they're not going to get the presumption of grace. As I said previously, it's the hard cases, except for the very, very, very most difficult cases. It's the hard cases where we need to rise to the occasion. One of the people who wrote to me, another person, was concerned when I talked about the early sense I had of the plan I'm going to talk about tonight, the proposal. And she said this: if we begin to reach out to the haters in social media, it'll take a lot of stamina and perseverance to break through their shield that protects them from reality. So we're going to talk about social media tonight because I think it's pretty obvious to all of us that that's a big source, not the only source of a presumption of hate where we need to have more grace, but it's a big one. I want to talk about, based on the questions and the feedback I've gotten, what this isn't about, because I think defining what it isn't will help us define what it is. Being interested in the presumption of grace in our discourse and in our society is not about being perfect. It's easy to slip into hate. It's part of the human condition. I slipped into it twice on Saturday, and I think about 5 times on Sunday. And I know how easy it is to waver, but this is not just a movement. This is not just a cause for people who are perfect. It doesn't require you to never feel hate. It just requires you to try to limit it and to try to think about how we can work to limit it in others. This is also not a debate about defining the term. And I had a lot of messages about that. You can say it's do unto others. You can say you should treat everybody like a human being, not question people's motives or character. There's lots of ways to describe it, but I think it's one of those things where you know it when you see it. And I think most of us know when we see something that's operating not on the presumption of grace, what that is and what those instances are. But I'm not that interested in defining it because I think everybody should kind of come to their own definition. I think those will be roughly the same. This is also not a religious thing, a religious movement, a religious concept. Certainly, most major religions speak a lot about grace. They might use different words for it, and I certainly welcome input from people and participation from people who see this in a religious context. That's great, but this must be all inclusive. It must include people who see this in other terms. And so those who are concerned that I see this in religious terms or that using grace is a freighted word, that's just not how I see it. I think, as I said, everybody can understand the concept regardless of what religion or what faith they have, or if they have no faith at all in terms of organized religion. And then finally, to define what it's not, this is not about me. As I've said, my experience in my life, in my last 3 years in particular, where I've learned a lot about the importance and necessity of both giving grace and receiving it, giving forgiveness and receiving it. I certainly bring, as anyone would, my own experiences to this, but I see this as partly about the kind of culture that I live in, but it's also about our broader culture and the need for everybody to be able to be comfortable in going forward, knowing that the presumption of grace will be extended to them and to work hard to extend it to others. So while people might want to focus on my experience, that's not what this is about for me. And it's not the context in which I think about it or that I talk about it. So moving on now to what I see as kind of the best analysis I've been able to do so far about what propels this presumption of hate and how we can change the incentives for the individual actors in this whole cosmic universe that drives hate so easily and where grace is forced out. My focus is on Twitter. Now, all of social media has hatred, cable TV, websites, family gatherings. Twitter is not the only place, but I'm singling out Twitter because I think it's so influential in the discourse of politicians, of activists, and of journalists. And I think it's the place where so much of the what I call the four-headed monster, which I'll talk about, so much of the energy of the four-headed monster comes from Twitter. So don't get me wrong, my aspirations for our movement go far beyond trying to clean up Twitter. But that's where I want to start, because I think I've come up with a way to test whether we have the capacity to try to change things. Twitter is not real life, but it controls real life, as they say. And in a way, no one would disagree with that. The users of Twitter all would say, "Oh, I hate the thing. It's a sewer. It's filled with so much hatred." As far as I know, though, no one has tried the kind of effort I'm proposing this evening to try to clean it up. And so I'm excited by the fact that there's a problem that lots of people see, that no one has tried to solve, that I believe has a potential solution that is relatively simple if we can execute it. There are lots of people who look at Twitter as a sewer, who I think are a bit hypocritical about it, or at least narrow in their perspective. Thinking of one television network anchor who constantly complains to people around him about how he's attacked on Twitter, that he's never afforded the presumption of grace. And that person will complain about individual tweets, will point them out. And then if you look at his own Twitter feed, you'll see plenty of negativity on his Twitter feed. He does not accord others the presumption of grace. And that's pretty typical. There are plenty of people I know who get attacked on Twitter who also attack people on Twitter. So the four-headed monster starts with Twitter. The four-headed monster, it consists of four elements. They all work in concert. I'm going to talk about it as a linear assembly line, starting with Twitter, going through evildoers, the media, and leaders. But often in individual case studies, you'll see that it's not just linear. It might start with an evildoer, or it might start with the media, or it might start with Twitter and then go to the evildoer and then back to Twitter. But these are the four heads of the monster. And I think if we talk about their individual roles, you can see that it doesn't really matter how linear it is. They all interact in a way that really does serve to perpetuate, more than most areas of life, I think, the presumption of hate. So let me talk one by one about the four heads of the monster and how they work. The thing that they share in common, all four elements, all four heads, is they don't have any concern for facts. They don't have any concern for due process, for prior relationships. They don't care much about past success. They don't care much about past good works. They don't care much about humanity. And most of all, they don't care about grace. On those four elements, they just don't care about grace. It's not a priority. There's no incentive for them to care about grace. All the incentives are towards hate. So Twitter, what happens on Twitter? Well, if you're treated badly on Twitter, chances are no one's going to come to your defense, because if they do, they'll be the subject of attack. They'll be a target. So what happens when someone makes a mistake, but they become a target of a mob on Twitter, then 90 to 100% of the things that are tweeted in response to them in these cases is going to be negative. And the other three heads of the monster will see that. And each of the other three heads of the monster mobilizes. So the Twitter mob, you all know what I'm talking about. Someone does something in the public life. Maybe they do something on Twitter, and the mob decides that they need to be attacked. Maybe they need to be canceled in the view of the mob, but at a minimum, they need to be attacked. They need to be treated with hatred and afforded no grace whatsoever. So when that happens, not always, but often there's also the threat of the evildoer. The evildoer is a head that often exists. Sometimes it exists undetected, but the evildoer is someone who sees an opportunity. Sometimes they instigate the Twitter mob, but typically they'll see the Twitter mob going after someone who they'd like to see destroyed or taken down in some way. And the evildoer will do what they can to spread it along. They might, if they have a lot of Twitter followers, retweet. They might encourage other people to tweet. They might call the tweets the attention of the press or to other people in the lives, and to people in the lives of the person who's the target. But the evildoer can operate with a lot of impunity because they're never suspected. They're seen as simply one of the four heads, and they're accepted as part of the process. Someone who is helping to spread hate. There are lots of cases I can cite for you where the evildoers are apparent to anyone paying attention. But as I suggested, there's some where the evildoer is not visible and perhaps is known to the person who's the target. But that person is highly motivated to not only create more hatred on Twitter against the target, but to make sure that that hatred is seen. The next group is the press. And I refer to the concept of the pro hate media, but that's really a shorthand for all the media. Because right now there's no one in the media, there's no organization that deviates from the business model of the more hate the better. There's not a lot of clicks or eyeballs or buzz that comes with extending a presumption of grace. And so whether it's an organization that's controlled in effect by a woke mob or a fierce right-wing mob, you can take any organization you can name practically in the whole country, television, internet, cable TV, broadcast TV. You see, I've got some examples up in that slide that was up. I mentioned last time the Daily Caller, the Daily Beast, but it's true of the New York Times as well. The people there only see negative stories. And if you read stories about Twitter mobs, the tweets that will get cited are the negative ones. You won't ever read about people coming to someone's defense, almost ever. And as I said, they've got a profit motive to be part of the four-headed monster, but they also have a personal motive. Sometimes it's ideological because they like the motives of the mob, of why the mob wants to go after someone. But sometimes it's simply that they don't want to be targeted themselves. They don't want to be seen as out of step. There are plenty of senior people at organizations with responsibility who you would think would occasionally say, well, that's not being imbued with a presumption of grace, but they're afraid that they'll be next, that they'll be targeted next. And so their decisions are often predicated not just on financial considerations, but also on personal ones and institutional ones. The final leg, or head rather, of the four-headed monster is leaders. And as always, I use leaders in air quotes. These are university presidents, newspaper editors and publishers, the head CEOs of companies. These are people who know that our society is poorer when the presumption of hate dominates over the presumption of grace. But they too are worried that the mob will come for them. They too look at the dynamics of the four-headed beast, of which they are one head, and they don't want to get in the way of the movement, of the direction of the movement. So they're told, these leaders, by the head of their legal department, the head of their PR department, the head of their HR department, where applicable, their investor relations department. They're told, don't fight the mob. The mob will win. So you need to do what you need to do right now to give in to the mob. If that means firing someone, fire them. If that means canceling something that's been announced, cancel it. If that means issuing a public apology, do it, even if you don't believe in it. And the greatest problem for these folks, and the ultimate goal, I believe, is to try to change the incentives of the leaders. Is that possible? Those are the four heads on the beast. And so the question is, what can we do about them? I don't believe in the short term that we can change the motives and the behavior and the incentives of the evildoers. They're motivated in a case-by-case basis, but they have a very particular goal in mind. I don't believe in the short term that we can change the behavior of the media, which is not so different than it's always been. The press has always preferred negative over positive. But the current dynamics, I believe, are too powerful to change. The two parts that I want to work on are the leaders, and then most directly, Twitter. If you look at Twitter, as I say, and those of you who are on it know, it's very difficult to stop a mob. Once someone is targeted with negativity, very difficult to stop and to get people to be defended. Why is it difficult? Well, if you defend someone, you'll be attacked, typically. People who've defended me on Twitter in the last 3 years typically have been forced to delete their tweets or hope that the mob moves on to another target. What we need to do is we need to build a good mob of grace on Twitter. I'm hoping a lot of you are already on Twitter. If not, we're going to start doing tutorials for some of you to get you on and teach you how to work it. One of the challenges is people don't necessarily want to defend someone they don't know. someone where they may not know the facts. You know, why is this mob going after this person? Maybe there's some reason. Now, there's never a reason for them to be attacked without a presumption of grace, but our good mob of grace is going to be well armed with the facts they need to be able to participate, and they're also going to be mobilized quickly. And we're not going to attack people. We're going to stand up to bullies the way bullies need to be stood up to in this instance, which is not with cruelty, not with a lack of fairness, not with shaming, but with love, grace, and understanding. What we need to do is consciousness raise. Every case is going to be different, but the way we will win, the way that we will have a case study or two, I hope, in which we're successful, is when there's activity on Twitter, someone is in trouble, someone is being targeted, and we step in to ask the people who are going after them to think about what they're doing. And we're going to have to workshop the right language. I don't want this to be a thing where people just cut and paste the same language, but I want everybody to be on the same page about the kind of language that's going to be required here. And my hope is that if we can execute this, that there will be instances that we can then take to the press, that we can take to other like-minded people and say, look what happened here. This person was bullied, harassed, criticized, threatened in a way that did not reflect a presumption of grace. We're not trying to stifle debate. We're not trying to stifle speech. We're trying to counter speech that's negative and filled with hate with a little bit of a pushback. Again, not trying to embarrass anyone, not trying to take anyone down, but trying to elevate the discussion. Now, one thing I like about this plan is it doesn't cost any money. Our plan is to mobilize everybody who's able to participate and willing to participate with an email or a text. And all it's going to require is for people to go on Twitter and write some stuff. Again, the idea is to change the incentives of the Twitter mob. I believe that if people were confronted with what they wrote in Twitter in a way that was elevated and light was shined on it, they'd think twice before they did it. I've, in the past, sent tweets that I regretted sending that were too mean-spirited. Had someone shown them to me and not fought with me. Because what happens when people do confront each other on Twitter, where it's presumption of hate versus presumption of hate, people get their back up. They rarely want to give in unless the facts are truly against them in a way that makes them give in. But mostly it just escalates. We want to de-escalate it. Why would people change? I think the big thing that I've learned in the last 3 years is what leaves people vulnerable to the Twitter mob is that they aren't validated or contextualized. What do I mean by that? That they're seen as standing alone. Even famous people, even people who seem powerful, once the mob comes for them, they're alone. And when they're alone, when they're not contextualized within their achievements, their society, their families, it's easier for people to treat them without a presumption of grace because they don't see them as human beings. They see them as two-dimensional figures. And so my goal is, as much as anything else with these tweets that I'm hoping people will send, is to contextualize people, not to overstate them as perfect people or as people who are beyond reproach by any means, but to simply try to make them three-dimensional. Because I think it's much harder to threaten, bully, attack someone if they're not, if they're seen as part of society, as part of a group, as part of a family, as someone with a history, as someone with feelings, and someone who is worthy, as we all are, with few exceptions, of a presumption of grace. So that's my plan. The practical way that we're going to try to do this is I'd love for as many of you as are willing, and as I said, if you're not on Twitter, but you're willing to get on Twitter, I'd love for as many of you as willing to give us permission to contact you by text or by email when there's a case that we see. And there's 100 an hour. We haven't yet settled on exactly which cases we're going to pick. But when we see a case where we think that it would be good to set an example, to try to raise some consciousness, we'll send you a text, we'll send you an email, we'll explain the facts, we'll explain who's being targeted, we'll explain what they're being targeted for, and we'll ask you to get on Twitter, and we'll tell you the people who we think are worthy of hearing from you, and we'll ask you to weigh in with them, and we'll monitor it all very closely. And as I said, my goal with this project, this initial project, is to demonstrate to ourselves and hopefully to a wider group that this can work, that we can intervene in a way that changes behavior. Hopefully it changes the behavior of the people whose consciousness we raise, but hopefully also we're able to publicize that and hopefully set an example for a wider universe of people to say, this is what Twitter has to be. This isn't what our communication has to be. And if that happens, because I believe that most of the so-called leaders would like to not let the mob run their lives, I believe that they'll be freed up. It will be glasnost for them. It'll be a period of opening and reawakening that they will see the possibility that they can say, well, there's this mob that's going after this person, but there's also a good mob of grace, and they see it differently. And they've given me a reason to give some grace to the person who's being attacked. If we can develop some case studies over the next couple weeks, if we can find a way to work together and hopefully grow. My estimate is it's going to take 10,000 of us, and there are not 10,000 people on this Zoom, unfortunately. But my estimate is it'll take 10,000 of us. Not everybody will be able to weigh in every time. Not everybody will be willing to weigh in every time for whatever reason. But if we can get critical mass on enough times to produce evidence that this can make a difference, I'm confident from not just the last few weeks, but the last few years of my life and really my whole professional life, that there are many people like you all in the country. Many people understood the facts, understood the stakes, and thought that speaking up would make change more towards a presumption of grace as the defining characteristic of our society, as that the change that we can make, that in some ways is the hardest change of all because we're asking people to change hearts, but in some ways is the easiest change. It costs no money. And if we make this one change, I believe a cascade will occur of positive change elsewhere. Then we can really accomplish something with this. So, as I said, we're gonna email you all and ask you to sign up if you're willing to participate. If you need to learn how to use Twitter, we're happy to teach you. And then you'll need to look for emails and texts from us that asks you a call to action to say, let's all figure out how to influence what's going on with this particular person at this particular time. We'll capture all that, learn from it, and hopefully be able to set an example that we can extend to other things. We can extend to other social media. We can extend to cable TV. We've all had the experience in the last few months of seeing someone out in public without a mask who really should be wearing a mask and face that choice about whether to say something to them. Most of us don't. It's a difficult thing to do. What I'm proposing is a difficult thing to do. It's basically asking you to go to a stranger in public and say, you really shouldn't be doing that. And here's why. But that's what we need to do. Because if we don't, I don't see a chance that the presumption of hate will not continue across beyond Twitter to so many realms of life. If we can set an example and get some tangible results, I think we can make a big difference, and I'm excited about it. Thank you all for joining, for listening, and I'm going to open up now for questions at this. I'd love your ideas, your suggestions, your critique of my idea about the presumption of grace. And Paul, let's open it up for questions, please.